Welcome to the SOMOS framework for risk assessment. In this episode, we will look at the phase of appraising. The SOMOS model consists of 5 steps or phases. In step 1, exploring, we have been looking at your multi-use system, the policies you have to deal with, and the stakeholders involved in your project. In step 2, understanding, we have identified threats or hazards, we did a preliminary risk assessment, and we identified control options, mitigating measures, and coping strategies. In step 3, appraising, we will start with the list of risks that we have identified and a list of things you can do to control, avoid, or deal with the risks. Now we have to get ready to choose what to do. What we want to do is to weigh hazards, to weigh risks, the consequences under different scenarios and events, given our current level of knowledge and understanding. This means that when over time our knowledge and understanding changes, we will revisit this step. And we will evaluate or appraise our different risk management options. The role of the stakeholders is to provide norms and values to be included in the appraisal of scenarios, likelihoods and consequences, and in the development of acceptance criteria for mitigating measures. And a small note. The norms and values we develop in this step will be the same as we will use for the evaluation of the risk management plan later on in the process. Now there are some tools you can use in this step. There's the identification of critical hazards, cost-benefit analysis, multi-criteria analysis, societal cost-benefit analysis. Let's first look at the identification of critical hazards. We already made a list of different risks and have started to assess these risks and think of actions we can take to mitigate the risk. We have seen a diagram like this before, where you have the likelihood of something happening and the consequence if this happens. Whether the likelihood is split up in 3 or 5 categories or the consequence is being split up in 3 or 5 categories, that's not very important. What is important is that you can make a difference between risks that are low, medium, high, and very high. In this diagram, the green are low, the yellow are medium, the orange are high, and the red are very high risks. Now we have to decide for each category whether action is required. For example, green and yellow, we think that they are okay, and orange and red, action is required. Low risks may be tracked or monitored for impact, but for high risks, what actions can we take? We can try to eliminate, reduce, or control the impact. We can mitigate critical hazards in different ways. We can try to avoid the risk, which you want to do with risks with a high probability. We can try to transfer the risk or share the risk, for example by buying insurance. We can accept the risk, which is something you want to do when the expense for mitigating the risk outweighs the costs of tolerating the risk. And finally, we can limit the risk. This is the most commonly used mitigation strategy. It's a combination of accepting some of the risks and do some risk avoidance. So, we have identified the risks we have to address. We have identified measures we can take to deal with the risk. Now we have to choose which measures we will use. The question is, how can we choose? Of course, the measures have to be effective, but also we can look at efficiency. We have several tools available to us to make this selection. For example, we can use cost-benefit analysis. In a cost-benefit analysis, we look at the costs we have to incur to mitigate a risk and the benefits we get from the measure. In most cost-benefit analysis, we are trying to balance monetary terms. So how much money do I have to spend to avoid a certain risk, and how much money do I save by not having an accident? But of course, also other issues not easily expressed in monetary terms can be put on the scale. For example, benefits of changing your production process. Now, is making choices on your own already quite complicated? When you have to make a choice with a larger group, with people using different criteria, is even more complex. That is when you can use multi-criteria analysis. In multi-criteria analysis, you decide on which criteria you will use to assess the different measures that you can use. Now you can ask each of the people to score each of the measures on each of the criteria. Then when you add all the scores together, you get an image of how well each of the different measures are being perceived by the different people, and based on that, you can take a decision. Then there is societal cost-benefit analysis. This is based on the principle that there might be a difference between the private costs and benefits, so for the individual or the individual company, and societal costs and benefits of an undertaking. In addition, you include economic factors, but also societal factors and environmental factors in your cost-benefit analysis. So now we have to select our risk management measures. So in summary, together with your stakeholders, select risks you have to address, select the level of action, make a list of actions to address the risk, think of criteria to choose between the options, and then, in the next step, we will choose our risk management measures. In our next video, we will look at the phase of deciding.